Welcome back to the Femme FC Podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking all about leadership in elite sport. And with me to discuss this, I have Rachel Woodland, who is the current head of client engagement at the Next Level Group. And she's also an assistant coach for Fulham women's football team. She's also the former team lead of member success at Leaders in Sport. Rachel, thanks so much for being on.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to see where our conversation goes today.
Yeah, so would you mind just giving a little bit of a background on yourself?
Yeah. So I'll start most recent and work backwards. I have been working with Fulham Football Club Women as an assistant coach, and as the team has progressed through the leagues and professionalized and getting closer to being professional, I've been trying to find ways to have more time to commit to that. And part of that was changing my working situation, and really fortunate to be working with the Next Level Group as well. So split my week between them and Fulham and some other work, but with the Next Level Group looking at client engagement and trying to stay abreast of what's happening in this professional sports world, especially in women's sport.
And you've spent a lot of your career looking at and studying leadership in sport and working with leaders in sport environments. What initially made you interested in leadership development?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I enjoyed thinking about while I was preparing for this. And I guess it happens innately from a younger age when you're embedded in environments, playing sport yourself. You're naturally learning about different types of leadership, and you can work out what you assimilate with and enjoy and appreciate. But then when I was in college, I ended up studying business, which wasn't expected at a younger age, but part of that was around organizational structure and design, and then leaders within that. So I guess the formalized learning started in college and progressed as I went on and got my master's. And then as I entered into the sporting world with Leaders in Sport, it's like the gravitas of people and their stories and their ways of working was really enthralling. And then I'm also naturally a person that likes to help people. And so thinking about different ways and hearing different people talk about the different ways just all came together in a really nice way to then fully embed myself in trying to learn as much and help as many people as possible.
And so across your educational background and then also your experiences in working with leaders across different organizations, sports, etc., what sticks out to you in terms of what makes a good or effective leader? Like if you can kind of compile like all of the leaders you've worked with before, are there certain things that they have in common or certain archetypes that stand out as being the most effective?
Yeah, and I guess some of it will always come back to personal preference, but I think the first thing to consider is probably adaptability, and the fact that people will have different preferences and you'll be in different scenarios and different environments and different situations. And so being able to lead in a multitude of ways is going to be really beneficial to be effective across the greatest number of people and in the greatest number of situations. But then when I add in my personal lens and my favorite moments, they always come back to the human moments and the people that can connect with people on a personal level as well as a professional level, the ones that enable teamwork that results in combined thinking to problem solve collectively. I also really enjoy a good storyteller, and I guess that then comes back to communication and the people that can change their communication depending on what's needed in a different moment. And I can't go without saying that they care, and that will be they care because they've probably created a shared purpose. They care about what they're actually working in, and they care about the people that they're working with, and they're trying to do their best to have everyone operate at their optimal level as well once they're there. And I think on top of that, there's probably authenticity underlies across it all. And then in certain moments, letting the moments of joy and the human connection again come through, despite the seriousness of what people are trying to achieve. But I don't know. There's quite a long list there. I don't know which ones stand out to you and which ones you agree with as well.
No, that's great. I love what you said about a storyteller because it's so important. Basically, a leader's job is to unite people behind a shared goal or a common
Yeah.
cause. And the way that we relate to each other as humans throughout generations, throughout history, has been storytelling. And so it's how does that leader get people all aligned on the same mission, on the same path, towards the same common goal? And storytelling, finding the most effective way for the people that you have around you and the culture and the environment that you're in. I think that's such a unique skill set to have. And what I didn't hear in that list is being a given field expert, or being a given discipline expert. And in, excuse me, in professional sport environments, or at least sport environments, we tend to see that practitioners who are the best at their job, considered an expert, are ones who then get promoted to these leadership positions. Can you talk a little bit about that trend in elite sport and why that does or doesn't work in most cases?
Yeah, again, it's been one to reflect on, especially from the lens of women's sport, where there's often fewer people in the organization to start with, and people are having to do multifaceted roles regardless of what level they're at. And I think if you looking outside of sport as well, in the world of business, it's always been the high achievers in their role are the ones that get accelerated through the progression plans. And I think potentially a lot of that comes back to we've gone for hierarchical progression and job titles and status being really important rather than letting necessarily people find what they're good at and really develop that and be rewarded for being good at what they're good at. And I guess a good example from football especially is age groups and academies, and you might have the world's best under nines coach and they know they're great at that, and it takes a specific expertise to engage a 9-year-old for a season of football. That is very different to a men's first team or a women's first team. And the reward for the two different roles, again, very different. But without a good academy setting and the experiences at a younger age, you don't have the level of athlete entering the senior level too. So I think it's a traditional thing that's happened. It's probably partly a resource thing. And it's beyond sport as well that we see that happening too.
That's such a good point, is like the hierarchy or the verticality challenge, in that the typical way, from business and kind of the corporate side or the corporate world is you do well, you get promoted. You excel, do well, get promoted. And like you're saying, the best U9 coach, like the direct verticality of that is not necessarily moving on to U15s, U23s, first team. That's not necessarily like a direct progression. It's maybe a little bit more horizontal actually, because it's different skill sets that are needed. And so I think that, like to your point, in sport, we've kind of taken that corporate model and applied it where maybe it doesn't really fit. So what are some other, I have some thoughts on this too, but I'm curious to hear, like, what are some ways then that we show that we value and quote unquote promote people who excel in their roles?
Yeah. Again, some of these might not be actual ones, but I think if and we've spoken about this before, if you took a project and it's fundamental to the strategy of the organization or the team, and it relates to someone's area of expertise, letting them have a leadership role within that project would be a way where they get visibility to more people and maybe some cross-departmental involvement as well, without necessarily changing their title, but it being productive for the team and their goals, but also for that individual. And again, you've been lucky enough to work in a system that enabled that. So it's probably good to hear about that example.
Yeah, I think, in like women's soccer, for example, like if you have taking the ideas you just put forward, if you have, let's say, like the best sports scientist, but maybe they have no interest in being the performance director, or that's just not where their skill set is. They are not a natural leader. They are just very good at their independent work. The way to reward that wouldn't necessarily be, okay, let's now put you as director of performance or whatever it might be, because you might be setting them up to fail. So that's not actually helpful or rewarding in any way. So instead, it might be something like, hey, here's a project that's really important to the club and will directly impact athlete health and performance. Take this project on and, tell me what resources you need. And you can have ownership of this. And now that's rewarding the person. Like, here's, task. And also each individual feels valued differently. Maybe all they need is more money and a bigger bonus.
Yeah.
Maybe that makes them feel valued, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe it is that they want to take on more things. Maybe they want to have a student and start mentoring. So I think finding, if you're the leader in that situation or a GM and you're trying to find, okay, I have these great practitioners and I want to reward that, but there's not necessarily verticality in the organizational structure in terms of like promotion of job titles. Well, how else can you? And sitting down with them, what gives you value? How do you feel valued by this club? And then helping with progressing that along.
Yeah. And two other examples that come to mind quickly, like one might be giving them a research budget so that they could find a way to add something to the program, or it might be a learning budget so they could go and develop, like deepen their expertise rather than go for the verticality.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen across your roles practitioners who do get put into these leadership positions, and I am one of them, right? Like, I very much was just a physical therapist. That's what I knew. Rehab was my area of expertise. And then 2 roles in a row, kind of getting thrown into a leadership position and being like, hang on a second, I haven't been trained in anything I need for this job. So what are the skills that you most often see missing when someone is promoted from practitioner level to now having a leadership role?
Yeah, so I think one of the first ones is probably around time management and the fact that you're now having to consider how you show up for other people as well as yourself. And often our easiest solution is to do more hours. But if you're meant to be helping someone else and they're not available at your do more hours, then you can't help that person in that moment. So you got to kind of work out your way of working that allows you the focus time for yourself, but also how and when are you showing up for others. It probably then ties into a little bit of delegation skills as well, because no longer are you going to get all the glory and the praise for doing more doing than anyone else. It's your responsibility to help others do their doing. And you can't keep all that work to yourself. So understanding, again, who your people are and who will be able to do the different tasks well will hopefully help the functioning of the team as a total. And then I think there's probably the another one that comes in that first moment is a communication. And again, you might have been used to communicating to yourself what you're doing and you know what's going on, and maybe your line manager as well. But suddenly there could be any number of people that need to be brought along on that journey. And as we said, the storytelling, so they understand the why and the what's next, and a bit more than just, can you please do this now?
Yeah. And what are some ways, I mean, I mentioned I was kind of put into 2 leadership positions in a row and thought to myself, I haven't, like, the bulk of what my job description is, I have not been trained to do. Sure, I consider myself to be a decent human being who is empathetic and likes to help solve people's problems. I like to mentor and teach, etc. But I've never been taught how to do that. Whereas I've been taught vigorously how to be a physio. So what I did is I was lucky enough to be in an organization that utilized leaders in sport, and I signed up for literally every webinar that I was able to attend, like that were, US time zone friendly. And I also enrolled in the Master of Sport Directorship program at Manchester Metropolitan University. Just be like, I need skills here to do better at my job. So,
Yeah.
what are some ways that you recommend someone who has been a practitioner and maybe now has just recently been promoted and is kind of in the same boat I was of looking around and being like, hey, I know I'm a good sports scientist, but I don't know how to lead a team of now
Mm.
sports science, strength and conditioning, nutrition, mental performance, etc. What are some ways that you would recommend to someone like that to work on some of the traits and skills that you just discussed as being important in that leadership position?
Yeah, so I think again a number of different ways, and some of it's dependent on what's available to you. But um, the idea of deliberately setting time aside to learn, read, watch, listen, go and observe different leaders in different scenarios um, can be really valuable. Having people come in to watch you in your environment and get their reflections. But then I think you would agree as well that the mentorship and the reflective practice becomes really important, because with the world we're living in, there's an abundance of resource, but actually, what do we apply to ourselves, and then how do we make it stick and actually practice it? And I think when you take the analogy of, again, a soccer player or whichever, we say it's the ones who've had the most experiences that can then draw on it to make a decision in the moment, and a decision that's effective. So you've got to go and get the experiences of doing, but have that reflective practice to understand what worked, what didn't work, so that the next time it happens or a similar situation, you can tweak and go again. And that might be through formal mentoring and paying someone to do that, or it might be through unofficial mentoring and someone in the organization, or a critical friend, or yeah, that actually leads me to another point. I think around if you've got the self-awareness, and I think that's another skill that becomes really important really quickly, to know where your gaps are and the things you'd want to work on, is trying to deliberately build your network in those areas, so that it doesn't necessarily have to be you with the answers, but you know where you would go to for those answers, or someone who could help you problem solve through that as well. So there's a bit there.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, like the reflective practice and the self-awareness, I find self-awareness to be something that seems a bit like it doesn't really seem very tangible to me. Like how can someone who's not self-aware, like inherently then they're not self-aware enough to realize that they're not self-aware. So
Yeah.
so how can someone build something that they're or improve on something if they're not even aware that it's a fault to begin with or an issue to begin
Yeah.
with?
Yeah. So there's probably, again, a number of different ways, and it might come from a directive top down. But again, at Fulham, with you Spotlight, at Next Level Group, we recommend Spotlight, and doing that as a group. And hopefully, even if you don't become more self-aware, you become aware that there's more ways of being and doing and reacting. Um, and yeah, I've always wanted for myself to be able to consider different perspectives. And I guess if you're taking that approach, at some point, you'd hopefully realize that there's more than you've been operating in. So you might become a little bit more self-aware in that sense. And again, I like to think that in the sporting world, most of us really want feedback. Most of us are growth mindset, and have this weird thing where we always want to be told what we could do better. So 360 feedback could be a good way. And again, skilled mentorship or coaching through that to then understand what that means for the self-awareness lens would probably be the important bit, rather than just receiving 360 feedback. It's, and what do I do with that next?
Yeah, there's some when talking about leadership and building leadership, I remember when I worked for a club, we talked about who are the leaders on the team, like who are in the playing group. And some of the players, utilizing the mental performance coach to or the performance psychologist to build leadership skills and that being a resource. And it would come up sometimes the question of, well, they're just not a natural leader, or like that you can't learn leadership. How much truth is in that, and how much of it is genuinely like personality based, and this just isn't someone who's going to do well in a leadership role, or how much of it is they just need to be taught certain skills and then they can do it just fine?
Yeah, so I think, and again, going back to the previous question, leadership skills and deliberate practice of those, I believe, can be a thing as well. And I think to that specific question as to whether we're born a leader or not, I think I believe it's something that can be developed and grown, but I think everyone's born with a natural disposition to something, and it may not be leadership, or it might be a specific style of leadership. So then you could be a really brilliant leader in one context, but if you're never exposed to that context, you never really discover that for yourself. And so therefore, I think it's really important that you understand your own leadership style, and like the leadership of self should be a non-negotiable as well. So even if you're leading no one other than you, yourself, and I, it's still leadership. But again, from there, it's extending, how do I have an impact on others, and working out what magnitude that is to then realize your leadership style and where you'd fit in an organization for that leadership style.
What would you recommend for a practitioner who, is working in an elite sport environment, or women's football specifically, and they're thinking to themselves, maybe listening to this, thinking, I eventually want to be a leader. I feel like I have, the natural tendencies for it. And it's something that I want to eventually aspire to. What advice would you give them in terms of skills and habits, for lack of a better term, just regular practices to start implementing now to help prepare them for a potential future leadership role?
Yeah. So I think that number one building block is the leadership of self, and building that self-awareness, and then hopefully the emotional intelligence and the compassion and empathy. But I think there's some really core skills that would help you regardless of what level, but then also help you be a good leader in terms of listening, questioning, communicating. Just, I don't know if you would call it a skill, but definitely a trait, the curiosity, interest, just building that connection with people and understanding the different ways you can connect with different people as well. And then from there, I'd say it's the taking on those micro leadership moments, whether that's in a project or of a couple of people, or you realize you are really skilled in one area of expertise, whether that's within physiotherapy or whichever it is, and how do I teach others that, to then practice bringing people with you. And then I think it comes back to that experiences bank, and how do I gain as many experiences in as many different situations as possible to then be able to pressure test it over time. And I guess part of the self-awareness and the leadership bit is the emotional regulation, and definitely not to not have emotions, but to understand how you react in different moments, and again, the ripple effect that would have on others too. Yeah. What about you? What would you put into that bucket?
Yeah, so I would say that the emotional regulation bit is huge, and that's something that was an area that I actually spent a lot of time trying to focus on, because whether this was real or perceived, what I was feeling a lot of time was, as a woman in sport, a woman in a competitive environment, I felt like at first was that if I showed emotion, that it would show weakness, and that it would be written off as I'm just a woman and I am being emotional. And so I tried very hard to kind of just be a steel box, or like a steel trap of emotions. That didn't work. And it also then bled into my personal life. And now I am not showing emotion there either. And, for everyone to say like someone's emotional, we're human beings. Every human being has emotions.
Yeah.
And this is something that like I said, I went to therapy to work on. I have spent a lot of time reading about emotional regulation. I was taught meditation when I was playing college soccer. And so like bringing that practice back in. And so, I don't think there's one way to necessarily do this. For me, it was reading and then getting coaching, so therapy, and practicing like, okay, I'm allowed to first, let's understand it. Like, what are emotions? They're fleeting, that they don't last forever. And so I started to think, do I want to make a decision based on something that I will in a state that I will no longer be in a few minutes from now? No. So I need to be able to dial down emotions, but I can't turn them off, because then you don't really get trust from people. It's hard to connect with people. Emotions do help us form trusting connections and bonds with people. And so if you're just going around like, stone-faced all the time and not showing that emotion, it's hard to feel like you're a genuine person, and it's hard to connect with you. So being able to show vulnerability and use that as a strength instead of a weakness was something, again, that I worked really hard on trying to do. So now I kind of like the pendulum swung a little bit further for me. And then it was like, okay, I don't mind showing my emotions now. That's fine. I understand they can be superpower. I understand emotions better now. Then it was like, okay, allow myself to feel the emotion. But like I said, not making decisions from there, letting them dial down a little bit and then make a decision. And I think sometimes in elite sport, we rush in decision making because everything feels like it has an urgency and immediacy to it. And there are instances where that is the case. But most of the time, that's not actually the case. And there's not going to be a huge difference if you allow yourself 5 minutes to dial down an emotion, take some time for yourself, do a breathing technique or whatever it is that works for you, and then make a decision. So I think that your point on like emotional regulation was a huge learning point for me. And something that it helps with trust, it helps with collaboration and communication, and it ultimately helps you make better decisions, but not because you turn off emotions, and not because you just allow them to run wild, but you allow yourself to fully feel them, and then you don't turn them off, you just allow the intensity of them to come back towards a more baseline position.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with that. And again, been through some similar journeys by the sounds of it, but a big one for me became learning to communicate through the emotion as well, and being able to just control how the message is coming across when emotions are there or not there as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I tend to now try to say if I'm in kind of like a higher emotional state, and back to like the communication piece, I try to say something like, I want, like, what my intention is with the communication, right? I want us to solve this problem. I want to address this, and I'm going to. I need 5 minutes to dial this down. I'm feeling a little bit angry at the moment. I don't want to make a decision from here. I don't want to destroy trust. I don't want to yell. And so give me 5 minutes and I want us to solve this together. And that, first of all, it instantly like deflates me, right? It automatically dials down that emotion I'm feeling. And so I tend to tell people, like, something I say quite often is, I don't see the point ever. And I've seen this happen in elite sport environments where the leader will yell at one of their direct reports, or yell at them or berate them in front of others to prove a point. And then it's like, oh, well, it's motivating. Well, it's not really. Like, to be stood in front of your coworkers and be screamed at is, for me anyway, the opposite of motivating. So I always say, like, I don't understand the point of anger and yelling if you think about what is the end goal. And if the end goal is a healthy collaborative team supporting athletes' health and performance, there's no place for berating or demeaning others, right? That goes against what the end goal is. And so that's why I like to kind of state the intention. My intention here is for us to be able to work together on this. I'm not in the headspace to be able to have this conversation right now. Give me a few minutes and I'll get back to you. So that way the person knows you're not just ignoring it. You're not just putting it off. You're going to come back and have the conversation, and you're keeping the end goal in mind.
Yeah. And again, another trait that we've spoken about and raised is the trust piece. And so it's the trust that you're going to handle it in the way that is useful, and that you've got the right intention in mind at the end of it. So again, it's not personal. It's at the greater good of the athletes or the team itself as well.
That's a really good point about trust, is that if I get the feeling that you're just going to yell at me anytime I make a mistake, I'm not trusting you to be able to come to you when I do make a mistake, because I don't want that reaction. And so that, again, that just defeats the whole purpose of collaborative teamwork and communication. How can leaders, so we're talking about emotional regulation and things that are helpful to keeping everyone kind of in a trusting working environment. Besides emotional regulation, what are some other traits or skills, or how can you tell that there is effective leadership? What does that look like in practice when a leader really has a grasp on everyone working together as a team, working towards a common goal? What does that look and feel like?
Yeah, so I think, again, it probably is everyone feels like they are part of the team and they understand their purpose within that team and what they're contributing on a daily, weekly basis. And they also know the parameters that they're working within to be successful in the eyes of the leader, but also the strategic goals of the organization as well. So I think if you've got those anchors that you're working towards and you feel that you can do that either on your own or you know how you do it within the team, that's good, effective leadership to start with. And then if people also feel that they are developing, I think that's also effective leadership, in that for me personally, I want to know that you're thinking about me beyond the here and the now, probably. And so if I feel that there's a plan for me within the plan for everything else, I'm going to feel committed to the cause and, again, feel valued and understand that piece as well. I think an effective leader has enabled an environment that has good debriefing moments and honest debriefing moments where, again, you can be vulnerable and you can share where you think you weren't great enough or someone else wasn't great enough, but it's done in that constructive way that's not pointing fingers, but it's more, what do we need to do together to make this better, or like, what do you need to do on your own, because you can't always do everything together. But knowing that you're supported in that moment as well. I think coming back to like the storytelling, but it probably ties into like the inspirational leadership piece as well. And having someone that, because of the purpose they've created, the team they've created, your value within that, you would do whatever it takes to do it within good reason, obviously. But I think that person that because they care, you care, and because you know that your values there, that just multiplies everything as well. I think they also have to be a good critical thinker. And again, it's probably a skill that is underutilized, undertrained, under whichever else, because you need to, again, be aware of your blind spots, need to be aware that not everyone has the best interest with you. So it's like, I want what's being said, but is it reality that it can be achieved through that? And so that then leads to some more blunt conversations that might be, it's a good idea, but I don't think it's going to work because X, Y, Z, and then goes into that cycle of what do we do instead and who's working to do that. I'm a big believer in community, so you feel part of a community. And again, in a sports environment, we're really fortunate because you've got the team you're working within, you've got the team that you're trying to put on the pitch, on the field, whichever. You've got the fans that create community, you've got the commercial group and if all of that is in alignment, then it's a really wonderful experience to be part of, and something that hopefully stays with people for life as well.
And so then kind of on the flip side of that, or, related to that, is if a team or an organization is looking to hire a leader, what should they be looking for, and how can you get a sense for, like when you're hiring for a leadership position, how do you get a sense for someone who would be a good leader and it's not just someone who has been a good practitioner in the past?
Yeah. So I think some of that comes back to what we've already spoken about, and that self-awareness, in that they know exactly what they stand for, they know their values, they know why they are right for this organization and this role and this moment in time. And it's then that they can start to build trust almost immediately through the examples they bring of how they've done those things. And I think you've got to go through the different scenarios that you're likely to encounter, in that it might be there's a fresh injury, it's an injury we might not be as used to. How do you approach that? The head coach is saying this, someone else is saying this. How do you approach that? There's a conflict within the team itself. What might you do there? And build out these different scenarios that they answer, but the way they answer shows that they have actually lived it, and they can talk about what happened from that. And then you're even better if is where they're reflecting and they're saying, this is what happened, but this is what I've taken from it and how it's applied now or since then as well. And I think that then comes back again to the how many times have you actually lived through experiences to be able to show that you've got a bank of lived moments that you're drawing on, and it's not just theory, and it's not just I've done it once so I can do it every time, which I think, again, having spoken to loads of different people in the sports industry, and if you go back to the whole start of the conversation of people are looking to progress so quickly, and society wants us to have the job title and whichever else, and there's like this probably label around the younger generations especially wanting that. And I think it does literally come back to that example of the athlete. You're not asking them, that they're not proving their value by doing it once. They're having to go through this lived experience, and some of those things you really can't learn without living it. And so then comes back to the how do you expose yourself to those moments as many times as possible.
Yeah, I was just talking to a coworker recently. It's going to sound like it's unrelated, but I promise I'll bring it back to the point here about he took a helicopter ride with his wife on their honeymoon, and he was very afraid going into it, and was like, I kind of wanted to know like what the pilot of the helicopter, like what his experiences were. And he's like, so I'm just kind of chit-chatting with him, and he told me he flew helicopters in like war zones, and also did like some other crazy tourist spot, like I don't know, like in the archipelago, like just like in random places. and had done like all of these like crazy intense things. So our little helicopter ride around Hawaii was going to be no big deal for him. And anything that came up, he'd have faced something worse that he could draw on. And it's kind of really like, you want to know, it's not just how many years of experience do you have. That does matter because inherently with years, you get like quantity of experiences, but it's also how many different things that can also be really helpful, I think. So if you've just been in the same role year on year on year and have encountered the same problems and utilized the same solutions year on year on year, that's not necessarily gaining experience. That's gaining an experience and a depth of an experience, but maybe not a wider breadth of experiences that is probably more applicable to a leadership position. And so that's not to say that if you're in one job if you're a physical therapist for this one club for 5-10 years, that's not a bad thing. Just make sure that you're getting varied experiences somehow. And I think there's something to that, like varied experiences, so that you can take things from each experience and apply it to whatever is in front of you at that moment.
Yeah. And again, it will come back to what emotional state were you in when you experienced that. So can you do it under pressure? Have you experienced different types of leaders whilst having to perform that duty, so that again, you've adapted to the environment around you? Have you done it on a losing team? Have you done it on a winning team? And there's so many ways you can do the same thing, however many times in the sporting world as well. Yeah, and I think then I think it's really important that you're, as the person that's aiming to be hired in a role, that you're proving to yourself that there's the alignment of the organizational culture and their philosophy and their strategy to your skill set as well. And I live in quite an ideal world sometimes, but in an ideal world, that's starting to build the trust because you're showing that. And so I don't think I would ever hire anyone that I don't trust could do the job. But likewise, you need to trust that they're going to help you do the job, and that there's that synchronicity there as well.
That is such a good point. And it kind of goes back to your point earlier about younger generations, younger practitioners want to get that leadership or that title, the job title is so early on. And I see, especially I've seen this, this is just my world, but in women's soccer is there's a head of medical role that opens up and, oh, I've been a physical therapist in the league. I want this job. And almost like a desperation to get jobs are few and far between. There's only a couple of job openings each year. And so it's that kind of desperation of, I don't care what the environment is, I just want that job. Or it's fine if it's not going to be the best fit for me right now, it'll open up something down the road. And there's aspects of truth to that. But what I try to tell people is you have to make sure that the environment is going to set you up for success, and having that self-awareness to understand when something isn't right for you. And, having been in both ends of the spectrum where the environment, the culture, like exactly matched me and set me up for success. And then now I'm the same person with the same intelligence level, same personality, same skill sets, but you put me in a different environment where maybe things aren't aligned as much, and all of a sudden I can't do the job that I was just doing previously, and I'm not effective. I'm not an effective leader. And so I think being able to recognize in yourself, hey, you know what? I do best in an organization that is kind of a blank slate and I get to build things. Or I work best where there is a GM who is very direct and clear and blunt with me. And that is going to be how I work best. And knowing that about yourself. And then when you go into interviews, not just proving that you're good for the club, but making sure that the way what their ecosystem is like, what their environment and culture is like, is going to be one where you can succeed.
Yeah. And I think you're so right, because there is the scarcity of roles available. but it's so difficult for people to say no to something, especially if they've got a good way through that process, and there's that sunk cost almost in there that you've started to pitch yourself in that role as well. But again, in ideal world over here, it's waiting for the right thing, because it will be so much better for everyone involved as well. And I think that then comes back to the previous point of what can you be doing to be ready for leadership. It's really knowing yourself, to know those things so you can ask the right questions when you're put in that situation, rather than being blinded by the fact that that opportunity is there in the now.
Yeah, one thing that I learned during the sport directorship program I did was they taught us various models of reflective practice, and I found that to be extremely helpful in becoming more self-aware and recognizing, because I was going through this in a moment where I was struggling with in my role, thinking like, I feel like I'm not doing anything right. Like, what is going on here? I was just, felt so successful at my previous role. And now I feel like I'm doing literally nothing right. Like, I don't know how to function here. And going through the reflective practice and using some of those models to, it's more than just journaling. It's not just writing down what happened. It's being able to find the layers of that and like, okay, what could I have done better here? What was the context that that led to these decisions? Or what is it about me and my beliefs and past experiences that led me to these decisions? So yeah, using those models of reflective practice really helped me recognize why I wasn't being successful in a certain role and what changes I might need to make. Because you can only control yourself, right? I can't control how everyone else operates, who's not in my like direct line. It's, there's so many people to have to collaborate and align with that you don't have control over all the time. And so other than some reflective practice or including that, are there any models that you like to use or tools that people can start to build some of this awareness of like, oh, this is what I need to operate at my best, or these are moments where I felt like I was really crushing it, and here's maybe some of the contributing factors to that. Do you have any tools or practices that people can start to utilize?
Maybe none without a label, but I can talk about a couple of things. So I think, again, coming back to the beliefs and value system, I personally like to assess how I'm feeling in any moment against those, to understand if there's discomfort, does it link because I haven't acted in a way that marries, or I've been having to work in an environment that is different to those values, and then trying to do that against the different parts of life and work that are happening. I think, again, speaking from things I've done, there's been different books in whichever where they take you through like, what did you enjoy as a child, to now what is it that gives you energy, what detracts energy, and trying to narrow down that focus so that you can work out if these things are happening at the same time, that would make me feel most comfortable in myself. And definitely when you notice the rate rise, or like you're not sitting comfortably, it's trying to narrow down, as you say, going through the layers of what specifically has caused that. And I guess people will use the 5 whys and to try and get to that deeper level and not just accept that first answer. And yeah, I think, yeah. But
I like that model a
starters,
lot, actually. The 5 whys, like,
yeah.
okay, like why did that happen? And then, well, the team lost and emotions were high. Why? And
Yeah.
like keep asking until you get to kind of the root cause of that. Like I like that model a lot. All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for your time and talking through this. This is something, in case you couldn't tell, and I know that you know this from our previous conversations, but this is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about, because I think it makes or breaks the effectiveness and success of a team and the team behind the team. is what the leader is like. And if you have someone who's an ineffective leader, not only are you not setting that person up for success by putting them into that leadership position before they're ready, or when that's not a role that they are prepared to have, but you're also not helping anyone else below them or who they impact, like the players. So definitely an area that I'm extremely passionate about. And thank you so much for indulging me and talking about this with me.
Likewise, thanks, Nicole. And again, a conversation that could probably go on for days and days. Can I just add maybe two
Yes,
things?
absolutely.
So one of the things that I definitely noticed, we often learn, we think we're learning leadership by copying the leaders that we've had. And the assumption is that someone's in a position of leadership because they are a good leader and therefore they're a good person to copy. But I think, again, that comes back to go and experience different leaders, different types of leadership, because if you're learning that way, you might think something's right when it might not necessarily lead to the best results. And then I think the other big piece is like never stop trying to learn and never stop trying to develop those skills, because we as people are always evolving. What's possible is always evolving. And it's so cool to try different things and see what results you get in different environments as well.
Yeah, those are such good points. I especially like that last one of like never stop learning. You never know
Mm.
it all, and so
No.
there's always something to be learned and to challenge yourself on for growth.
Yeah.
Rachel, if somebody wants to connect with you or learn more about this, where should they go?
Yeah, so I think the best place is to find me on LinkedIn, and it should just be searchable through Rachel Woodland, and I'm an EL rather than any extra letters at the end. um, I'd say that's the best place.
Okay, and I can't let you go before asking my two rapid fire questions that are more fill in the
Yeah,
blank. So the first
yeah.
one is, what do you wish everyone knew about going from practitioner to leader in elite sport?
I wished everyone knew, and I guess the whole essence of this conversation is that it's different for everyone, and it is something that you can start to prepare for, but it will be very different to what you've been used to. And I guess for me, it's if you stay authentic to yourself throughout that, you're in a really good starting place.
Okay, and the next one is, my favorite thing about women's soccer is.
It probably comes back to the C word, community, and the fact that there is such a strong community behind it. And it's been so empowering and wonderful to watch women's soccer grow, and all these people that have been invested for so long get to see that massive change that's happening at this current moment.
Amazing. Well, Rachel, thank you again so much. It was really nice chatting.
Thanks, Nicole.